Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Dev Different podcast. We have today the esteemed professor from UNL, Dr. Bonita Sharif, a former professor of mine, actually, and we've kept in contact over the years since I was in college, which really was not that long ago. But she is an expert in many fields, eye tracking. Using gaze to augment certain sorts of problems in vision, computer vision, and things like that. And then requirements engineering. And I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Sharif. Give the listeners a little bit of your background.
Thanks, Hunter. Thanks for having me on the podcast. So it's been a while. You were in my class in 2020, I believe. That's just when COVID hit, actually. I
hmm
still remember that.
You were
Um,
actually. I was talking to someone the other day. You were actually the professor who delivered. So I was in your class when they said spring break is going to basically be the end of in-person class, and you were the one that gave me that news.
yeah, we just got that email. And yeah, I remember that like it was yesterday. And that changed for quite some years, actually, how we did the class. Luckily for computer science professors, it wasn't that bad because we are used to recording things and putting things online. So I think that's not too bad. But yeah, like you said, I do have some expertise in requirements engineering. I've been teaching this senior level course now since 2018 at UNL. I am associate professor in the department, been here since 2018. Prior to that, I've been in Ohio. My research is mainly in software engineering and HCI. So you're right, I do use eye tracking to understand how developers work. And hopefully, if we collect as much data as we need, we can understand processes, what differentiates experts from novices, and hopefully build better tools for them in the future.
Yeah, and HCI. Can you dig into that a little bit more for the listeners?
Yes, so HCI stands for Human Computer Interaction. As developers, right, we forget that developers are people, right? The last time I checked. So we really, the problems that associate with people also associate with developers, right? So when do developers need to take a break, right? When do they get fatigued? When are they stressed out? Things like this that affect productivity. We'd like to be able to understand that process and eventually support company culture to kind of help people be more productive.
The two things, and I guess maybe I don't want to overstate your expertise or involvement in requirements engineering. Obviously, that's the class that I took from you, so that's what I always kind of associate with you. But human computer interaction and requirements engineering, I would say, are probably the two most important fields uh, that there is a whole ton of juice to squeeze out of. And with AI transformationally changing the field of software engineering as it is, within our company and others, and in education and in industry and whatever. I think those are two things that, we haven't had the bandwidth to put our, like, the great thinkers of our generation on, or rather, it wasn't profitable or whatever, what have you. But now, I think human computer interaction, obviously with AIs being a computer and also kind of a proxy for a human, right? They're large language models, at least for the most part, that we're doing. Um, that's obviously a huge problem. And then, requirements. We're getting to a point in the industry or in technology where, the ability to succeed is going to be almost entirely how effectively can you translate a real world problem into a set of requirements that will output a software system to solve it. Because, you know where it used to be that actually building that system was a bigger obstacle, we're getting to a place where if you've got the requirements, you can kind of, start to have it built for you. So what are you seeing and you're obviously kind of in the academic space, so you have a different perspective on, AI and the ability to apply it than someone like me who's in industry, right? There's just different incentives and different things that we're trying to maximize. But I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first of all, academics and industry practitioners have to work together. It's not a one-way street, right? Which is why I definitely keep my options open and do collaborate with industry quite a bit to see. We don't want to build something in academia that eventually will be useless to the practitioner, right? So we need to be aware of what the needs are. So going back to your concern about, I think you're really talking about intent here, because intent is hard to actually come up with. The LLMs are great at the implementation, I agree, but the human is the best person to actually come up with the intent from
Mhm.
business rules, from these are complex things, right? But think about how software has changed from the 1990s to date. It's just inherently more complex, more dependencies, and so we need to. It's not going away anytime soon, right? That's not
Mhm.
going to change. So how can we deal with this in the academic space? One way I try to do this with my students is really try to bring um, the perspective from industry in the classroom. So, what I've noticed, first of all, let me tell you what they struggle with, right? Students struggle very much. They struggle with coming up with requirements from written and spoken word. So if I give them, a page or two of requirements, just text, right? It's actually hard for them to come up with requirements from there because some of that is noise, right? So they actually do struggle with that. To support that, very recently, I've actually started creating co-creation sessions with industry. So Don't Panic Labs is right downtown in Lincoln. Their team actually comes in to two of our classes and we sit and co-create together with it's a hypothetical system, but it's very realistic based on things that they've worked with in the past. So I think that helps students to understand how to create a workflow, right? Oftentimes students love to just start coding. I mean,
Mhm.
you can imagine like you're in a classroom and you just want the requirements given to you and you can code it, right? At this point, they're seniors in this class and they're already good. I have no doubt in my mind that they're really good at the programming part.
Mhm.
Where they fail is at the design and even before that at the requirements phase is
Mhm.
just coming up with these meaningful user stories. It's really hard. It's also hard for them, I think, to break things down into these workable parts,
Mhm.
right? Writing documentation is also extremely hard. I'll give you an example. I just remembered a very recent event that happened in one of the senior design classes that I'm actually sponsor for. So they had a release, right, for this product, and it was supposed to be deployed on my machine. I go there, I'm supposed to test it, but we don't really have. I'm assuming they should assume I know nothing about the product, right? So when I go there, I should be able to know how to test it. And I go there and there's a folder, there's a README in there, which is empty. But then because I know how they build the product, I see this app demo folder. And when I go into the app demo, there's a README that actually has the information. But if I was somebody, not able to
Mhm.
understand that, so that was nowhere written. It was in their mind. As developers, we have this tacit knowledge. We just assume others know in the team. So that's just one example, right? So learning how to write down these requirements and just documentation workflows is what I think we need to train our next developers to actually have those skills because that's kind of important. They think of it as busy work. It isn't.
You said something earlier, and this too just kind of makes me think about like because we're developers and developers have built software, and that's what we do. I think what you mentioned before with like HCI and developers and like considering that developers are humans is not something that has been done a lot, right? Because developers build software. We don't. build, we don't think about the tools that we build software with, and how do we think of ourselves as flawed users, right? But and I don't want to say flawed, but like, we're humans, we have our human brain, and our brain has a certain, we have certain proclivities. Like you mentioned, reading a one-page document that should contain all the information that we need to generate a set of requirements in a class, right? You mentioned like students struggle with that. And, if you kind of go back to like, what is the human brain? What structures and processes are we optimized for? Like, it's honestly not that surprising, right? Because, over 50% of our brain processing power, if you will, is dedicated to visual understanding, visual learning. And so that, that idea of textual, kind of forcing that interface on ourselves. It's interesting. And like, I think that there's some really big opportunities to update, to reconsider. Again, it's always good. We have AI, which is fundamentally transforming the software development industry. And like, I think that there's some upgrades that we can do that aren't actually even necessarily enabled by AI, but just like, it's a convenient time while we're already going through a transformation to kind of make some updates to the way that we develop software. And I know, I've shown you a few early versions of the product that we're building, and like, one of the things that I like to keep, top of mind is, as developers, we have like a limited amount of bandwidth to hold in our head. Like, what are the objects that I'm working with? And what are, for example, we use a derivative of iDesign, right, at CodeBuddy. And so there's managers, and there's engines, and there's accessors. And, traditionally we've looked at those things in, if I open up Visual Studio, in a file tree, right? And we've looked at them that way because, well, that's how they're stored on the machine, in a nested file tree. But, we go back to first principles. Let's just think about what's best for the humans. Is that the best way to visualize our code? I don't think so.
No.
And so, I think it's just super exciting to me, at this time of like, we're at the precipice of something, right? I don't know what it is. I don't know exactly what software engineering is going to look like in the next 2 years, 5 years, but I do know it's going to look extremely different. And I just love having conversations with people that have your perspective of, thinking about the human computer interaction, thinking about the requirements, because I think it's those perspectives that are ultimately going to win in shaping what is the next, kind of the next iteration of software engineering.
Yeah, so I wanted to comment about AI a little bit because I didn't mention that earlier. I think AI is here to stay, right? We use Copilot, but I think we have to use it, and for implementation, it's fine, right? It writes a lot of the code for you, and why not optimize your coding in that way? Hopefully, knowing what you're choosing for the logic you want to implement. Um, I think there's a place for it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I wanted your perspective actually, Hunter, on this.
Yeah.
Um, so you've heard of the digital twin, right?
Mm.
So would you, I guess I can ask you a question. Would you allow your digital twin, let's say Hunter, go into meetings for you and let's say, make decisions for you after they've learned, how you would interact. So are you comfortable at this point in time that happening?
Yeah. It's a great question. And it's something that like early in the large language model kind of craze I had thought about, is like, okay, so if I just load all of my digital communication that I do, emails, text messages, instant messages, what have you, into essentially fine tune a model with all that. Like, you can potentially train something to respond the way that you would respond and think the way that you'd think. And so would I trust a digital twin of myself to make decisions on my behalf? Essentially, right? I honestly am gonna say that it depends, but there are some situations that I would. depending on the, you know, because okay, this is essentially this, it's the same question, different implementation of like how much would you let an AI code for you, right? And the way that it breaks down is like you can let an AI code for you on the problems that are like low leverage enough and or they're well defined enough. So going back to the meeting thing, if I have to go to a meeting where I'm like doing a token presence, right, like a daily stand up, would I let an AI like attend a daily stand up on my behalf? Probably, right? Or something like some sort of update meeting or whatever, where the gravity of what's being talked about is pretty low, and or it doesn't take a lot of like cognitive, I'm not thinking super deeply about this. But then there's others where it's like it wouldn't even be an acceptable proxy for me, right? If it's an ideation meeting, if it's something where we're solving a problem with a customer, or we're trying to come up with a creative solution to something that we haven't seen before. um Absolutely not. And I think like that's what's so exciting to me about this revolution, because like probably everybody, as you're thinking about it, everybody has to go to meetings, right? And meetings are not people's favorite things, but I don't remember who it was. It might have been Jeff Bezos, but he I think it was Jeff Bezos that said like the reason people hate meetings is because they're not important, right? Or they're not critical, right? And uh, that's obviously not true about all meetings, but generally speaking, I find that it's true of the ones that I dread going to. It's like, are we actually making important, critical decisions here, or are we just doing things for the sake of, because that's, in business, that's what you do, is you do meetings and you do productivity and stuff. Um, but yeah, I don't know if does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think along the same lines, actually. Yeah, it is nice to have um, meetings where you can show up as a token, right? And I think I would trust that as well. But certainly to make decisions, absolutely not. I agree. I had the same answer because somebody asked me this question the other day, and it was like, um, I'm not so sure I believe in the tool so much to make more risky decisions for on my
Hmm.
behalf, right? Um, but in terms of other, I think other productivity wise, I feel you're right. The next generation of software engineering will look very different. I think it will be very similar to what CodeBuddy is doing actually right now, which is I think you're really at the next level, software engineering processes because it's not just you're coding with an AI next to you. You're making it part of you're you're asking it not just how to implement but hopefully helping you with the intent as well, right, as to
Hmm.
why you're doing it. So I think that's where, and then not to trust it at face value but ask questions. So I really think it should be a conversation, right? You ask questions, um, and then figure out, you still have to have the human in the loop and figure out, okay, maybe a yes, this is valid or this is not valid, you were wrong here, and then learn from that process, right? So I really like what CodeBuddy is doing in that regard.
Yeah, appreciate that. So yeah, let's take a step back, because requirements engineering or intent, or breaking down a problem into a software system specification, right? That's a big problem, and that's to be honest with you, like the people that are good at it, there's not very many of them, and they all make a ton of money, right? If you're super good at taking a business problem and turning it into like a specification that you can hand to a team and they can just go and execute on it, like you're fantastic. But from the perspective of the field, right? Like how would you describe to somebody that doesn't know the nuances between qualitative and quantitative requirements, or functional and non-functional and whatever? But what is that process like? Of I have a business problem and I want to build a software solution to fix it, or help it.
So it's very much a conversation, right? So you have to ask questions. So I do this demo in my class where I pretend to be a client that comes to the class with trying to build a product for my company, right? And I just come in and say, I want a cool software product.
Mhm.
And yeah, you're looking at me like, okay, what does that mean? But that is the conversation starter. So I expect you to ask me, okay, what is this product you want that is so cool? Like, tell me more about this product. And then I will say, oh, this product needs to do X, Y, and Z, right? Is there any time requirements for it? Is there any constraint that it needs to fit under, right? So if you don't, clients usually don't come to you and say, these are all my things I want you to do for me. All they say is they might give you a flyer, they might give you some high level requirements, they might just tell this to you, right, as they talk to you. um, it's your job, as it's our job as a software developer, as a systems engineer, as a requirements engineer, or as a business analyst, whatever you call yourself nowadays. The title doesn't matter. Basically, the liaison with the client is to ask them these questions with the sole goal of figuring out everything they would like the software to do, right? It's so you have to think of. I like to build this analogy. You have the world right around you, and you have this machine. You're building the machine, right? Your machine interacts with the world, right? So your job as a developer is to figure out what the machine does and then how the machine interacts with the world, which means what are the inputs that the user gives to the machine, right? What is the machine output if the user gives something invalid? Like, does it shut down? Does it just crash? Does it give a more robust answer and then move on? So all of these things, like, it's not just enough to simulate the happy path, right? You have to also have exceptions. What if your users are not going to give you good data all the time, right? They're not even going to know initially what they want. Your job is to ask, right? This is why I think the co-creation sessions, I really think this is critical with clients, is having the stakeholder, the client, and you could have multiple stakeholders, right? In a business, it could be the developers themselves, it could be just people in the wide environment that are using your product or within the company. Um, they need to sit together at some point in literally together in a room or in a Zoom meeting and figure these things out, right? By asking questions and writing them down. And then when you see them written down, never underestimate, right? I tell my students, never underestimate what you can learn when you actually write something down, because writing is actually thinking. And the more you write, the more you start to think about what you've written, and then you make it better, right? So when you're writing a requirement, you come back the next day and you look at it, you're like, oh, this is missing something, right? Where's the, I don't know, it might be such an open requirement that it can't be implemented, right? So asking yourself this question over and over, and then having those co-creation sessions builds this shared understanding. And I repeat, this is the key word, right? Shared understanding of the requirements. It's not my understanding, it's not their understanding, it's our shared understanding. And I think that's, if we can get that right, that's where we struggle with the most, actually, as developers. If you get that right, I think the rest becomes easy.
Yeah, you're totally right. Like, shared understanding is really the only thing that matters. Even you think, like, as a developer, right? Somebody describes, if there's a client that is describing, oh, I want you to build a software that does this, and you're like, oh yeah, and we can make it do X, Y, and Z. Like, you think that you have the understanding. uh, the worst thing that you can do at that point is to go and build it to do extra things X, Y, and Z based on what you think your understanding is, because it's not, if you don't live in that world every day. um and yeah, actually, I agree. Writing requirements out, and I actually use a technique where, shared canvas or what have you, when having that conversation, that what did you call it, like, where you're meeting with the client
The
and
co-creation sessions.
co-creation session. Yes.
Yeah.
So while you're having that co-creation session, I find it immensely useful to have a document that's up on the screen or being shared in the Zoom, where, because customers too, and developers alike, like just as humans, like a lot of times the things that we're actually saying like in words are not directly what we mean. And I find that having like a shared canvas that everybody can see, that's summarizing the things that are being talked about as they're being talked about, is immensely helpful, because it creates like a situation where, okay, if I wrote something and it's not right, that is the client's opportunity to like look at that and say like, oh, but actually it's not that, right? Versus if they just told me, and even if I wrote the same thing down, if I'm not sharing it with them, right, they never know that what I wrote down isn't accurate to what they actually wanted. So totally agree that like, yeah,
And
shared
sometimes,
understanding.
Hunter, sometimes too, you notice that when you have multiple stakeholders from the same organization,
Mm.
sometimes they contradict each other.
Yep.
And that is kind of a hard situation to navigate, but you have to, right? So you have to figure out what's the, maybe they both see it in their own view, but when they come together, then they realize, oh, this actually impacts somebody else differently. And it's our job to ask those tough questions and then iron out those little details, right? That seem conflicting
Hmm.
initially, but they really aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like, prioritization as well of requirements. Again, this is something that like in a co-creation session that I've found to be just super impactful, is like, maybe you've been working on the project for a while and there's a few different lines of effort that you could go down next. Every client, every stakeholder is going to say, well, can we just do them all right at the same time? Like they're all priorities. And
Yeah.
my answer is always, that's not what priorities mean. Right. And so, like, forcing them to actually stack rank priorities, like during a live co creation session, right, is a lot of times again where you kind of suss out those, like, oh, people have different visions for what's important, and those are the ultimately, kind of like that book, like the obstacle is the way, right? Those friction points that occur when you're meeting with clients, where either you don't understand what they're saying, or they don't understand what each other are wanting in terms of stakeholders, or they don't, whatever, what have you, like those are the things that are important to talk about.
Yeah.
It's not important to talk about in these meetings the things that everybody has a shared understanding of, everybody agrees on, even though it feels like, naturally it's easier, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to run a meeting where it's like bing, 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 bing. Okay, yes, next week, right? But again, you go back to, that's probably one of the meetings where I would let my AI be a part of it and not me, right? Because if we're not going to have any tough or frictionless or what have you
Yeah.
conversations, and like I don't really need to be there, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I was just thinking as you were saying that. So, um, one of the, I think one of the crux points of actually creating requirements, at least currently, is the user story, right? We have
Hmm.
user stories, and then you assign it to teams, and then you have all that project management involved with that. And I wonder whether we are at a point. I don't think we are there now, but I wonder at some point if we could use AI to actually help us create a user story. Of course, with the human in the loop, because like I said, humans are the best at actually the at the creativity and coming up with the actual requirements. But we can possibly use some help. I don't know how. I don't know
Hmm.
whether our LLMs are trained in that. Again, it depends on what it's trained on.
Sure.
And every domain is different. So I don't know what you think about that aspect of user stories and using AI for that.
Yeah, it's a planned feature in the backlog of Ride. So we've done some experimentation with it, and that these large language models, they're incredibly flexible, right? And one of the things that's just so mind blowing to me, like, they talk about like the intelligence level, right? And maybe like GPT-4 was equivalent to like a sophomore in high school in terms of raw intelligence or something like that. And then, maybe 4.0 is like freshman in college. And obviously they're talking about, we're going to get post PhD like yourself, capable large language models, which is great. But the way that I like to think about it, right? Okay, even if it is only as intelligent as a high schooler, right? Could you could you, Dr. Sharif, take a moderately intelligent high schooler and train them to look at a user story and okay, your job is only to make sure that the user story is formatted correctly, meaning that we have a user role that's actually defined in this list of user roles from the system. We have a what, so as an admin, I want to be able to create a new team so that I can do that before I onboard the new team so it's easier, right? You could do that. You could totally train a high schooler how to look at those user stories and say, like, yes, this one's good.
Yeah.
No, this one is not properly formatted. There's no so that statement. This one is using a role that doesn't currently exist. Maybe even you could teach them to look for when you have what do they call it? Solutions masquerading as requirements, right? Where it's like, as an admin, I want a modal dialogue to pop up when I do this. And it's like, that's not a user story, right? That's a solution.
Yes.
And you could probably train a high schooler to look for all those things, right? And so the same thing applies to a large language model, right? If we give a specific model, that's your only job. And there might be many of them, right? You're not gonna solve all of software engineering with one of these kind of like situationally specific large language models. But if you line up 150 of them and they're all doing a specific thing that you have very targeted taught them how to do, then like I don't I, I don't know where the ceiling is. I know we haven't hit it yet, but like without even major upgrades in the current AIs that we have access to, like I think we're 5% of the way to actually using their intelligence in the way that they're capable of. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I really like the way you describe that because it's almost like a pipe and filter model, right? Uh, Choose what you want. And it could be even while you were talking about that, I also thought of one where, you could ask it to check n number of user stories and see if there's anything that is basically contradictory because
Hmm.
many times students have this problem of creating user stories that are actually contradicting each other.
Hmm.
In terms of constraints, right? User stories can be as complex as you want it, um, and so I feel like this pipe and filter approach. I'm thinking architecture now, right? But not like computer architecture, software architecture, and I think that that's basically what you described is that model, and you can plug in whatever you want. And I really like that analogy of the high schooler, and training somebody, and that's what we do, right? As this is why I am in academia. Is like uh, the students that we see come in. Oh, the students that are good will always be good, right? They don't need us. They don't need the professor, right? What we the students that are struggling, I mean, they need the professor. We need to figure out how we can help them, and that is my goal as an educator is um, to reach that population and figure out how we can make them better. And I think some of it, yes, AI can help, but not without the human intervention.
No,
But I really like that
absolutely.
approach. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, like this is why I'm not on social media, and many reasons why, but I have accounts and stuff, but I don't use it, and like it's one of the reasons why I hate reading about AI on like social media or just like your generic blog posts because like especially early in in the AI craze, it was all about like replacing jobs, right? And it's just like so backwards to me because not only is like AI not going to just outright replace jobs. I mean, if GPT 4.0 can directly replace the job that you were doing, like, okay, probably should be replaced, right? You probably have more to bring to the world than what you were doing in that job. But if it's something more like kind of complex, I think not only is it not that, for example, requirements engineering, right? Not only is it not that you don't have to know about how to do that anymore, I think that on the contrary, those that are most successful. So for example, if there was 5 people going to build a company to make the next AI requirements engineer. I'm betting on the one that has the deepest understanding of requirements engineering, because you have to know, it's like you can do something that you don't halfway understand, you don't fully understand, right? But when it comes to teaching it, right, that's when they say like see one, do one, teach one, right? Because the
Yep.
teaching part is the highest level. You have to have the highest level of understanding in order to be able to do that successfully. And guess what? Like building a purpose built AI, system that's a composite of many AIs and that can do complex and high level tasks, all it is teaching when it comes down to it, right? It's teaching the AI what things to look for. It's teaching it what actions to take when you see certain scenarios. And so, like, I don't know. I think education and deeper understanding of, maybe not like how garbage collection and variable initialization works. Like maybe that's a problem we don't have to deal with anymore, right? But we almost, it's all kind of incumbent on us to upskill and to gain a deeper level of understanding of our crafts, because that's going to be the way that we can actually unlock the power of AI.
I 100% agree. And, I feel like the marketing is not doing justice to this. So I don't know if you've seen the Apple Intelligence ads recently. They're basically telling, they're like hyping almost the fact that, oh, you didn't read this document.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a summary. Make yourself look smart.
Mm-hmm.
That's not where we should be going, right? It's almost like saying, "Oh, you didn't read it. Don't worry, you can fake it. I'm going to give you all of this summary and just read it." So it's like, and so there was the CNET article. Actually, my student sent it to me. There was a CNET opinion piece on Apple Intelligence, and basically the title was something like "Apple Intelligence is for the dumb people or stupid people,"
Mm-hmm.
something like that. I'm quoting them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I feel like that's the wrong way, right? And I
Yeah.
agree 100% that what you said makes sense. But then when we're targeting this to the masses, this is what they're advertising.
Yeah. And I think too, like there's an element of, the true greatness, right? Like obviously I believe that what we're building at Code Buddy is transformational, it's unique, it is going to help people in a way, it's truly creative, and those things take time, right? And I'm sure that there are many other people, other companies that are also doing the same thing, and doing things right and thinking deeply and building very complex systems that can do complex things the easier way. And that's why there's always going to be a bias towards those like simple wrappers, or the kind of like, because down selecting information, so summarization, that's like, this is not new, right? Like Apple Intelligence is like putting this out there as like, oh wow, that's crazy. It's like
Right.
you're newly integrating it into your phone, sure, but like how long have we had AIs that you could put a document into and get a summary out of? And it's like, this is
10 years,
not,
maybe
yeah,
10 years.
this is not revolutionary, but it's easy, and to the masses it sells, right? Because it seems like, oh, I don't like reading documents, and I'd like to have summaries. Again, I think like it's a good flag, or like code smell, if you will, on your life, where it's like if AI can replace directly in its current form a particular activity, it's
Right.
probably because you didn't like it because it wasn't important enough, right? Like if documents can be summarized and you get all of it out that you need, that's great. But that probably means that like it's replacing a pretty low level activity in terms of productivity, or um, you know, what have you. But
Yeah. So also I want to, and I'm sure at CodeBuddy you're aware of this. So and I try to build this part of our class as well, because we try to follow the ACM code of ethics, right? And are basically because we teach uh, towards those principles. And so I try to stress this, and I don't think students take this seriously. But as software engineers, we have an ethical obligation to society,
yeah.
especially if you're using AI. We need to make sure it's safe, fair, and people know what they're getting into.
Hmm.
So you
Yeah.
controlling that AI rather than AI controlling us. I don't know. It
Yeah.
almost feels like AI is controlling us.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the ethical conversation is one that I could talk about for a while because, I am very passionate about there's certain companies, almost industries, right? But certainly companies that I feel I almost feel like a sense of responsibility to correct the moral wrongs that they have committed. And that being like, talk about technology addiction, for example, right? There are companies, and Twitter is one of them. And this was a long time ago that I read this article. But Twitter, Facebook, Meta, whatever. I'll go on record, not a fan of the economic models that are going on here because, for example, at Twitter, there I read an article several years ago, and they had done a study surrounding like the appearance of your notification number, right? So you open the Twitter app, and in the bottom, there's like, I think it was the bell at the time. I don't know if it's still that. And then there's like a red number that pops up to show you like how many notifications you have on your Twitter account. And they did a study and actually found that, and it's kind of basic psychology actually once you dig into it, but delayed response produces a greater dopamine hit, right? Because you anticipate, right? So they found that if they hard coded a slight delay in that number appearing when you open up your Twitter app, that you would get a bigger dopamine hit when that number did pop up. And you, therefore, Pavlov's dogs, right? You train your users a little bit more. Twitter's
Mm.
good because I get dopamine. I get excited. Like I feel fulfilled. And, as our devices get better, screens get better, batteries get better. I wear AirPods a lot, right? That's an interface to my brain. Um, and then the software side of things, like you get to a point, and we're certainly there now. Like I don't know when the inflection point was, but it's no longer a case of like, we talk about technology addiction and things like that. It's easy to be like, oh, well, just put your phone away, use it less, set more limits, right? I'm not even there anymore where like I blame an individual for becoming addicted because our brains are just not smart enough. Like you'll lose 100% of the time. You in the wild west of technology and screens and changing colors and content recommendation algorithms and whatever, it doesn't matter. Like you lose. And so you talk about ethics, and it's like I feel very strongly about this that uh, economically, right? In order for a capitalistic system to work, you have to be able to quantify externalities.
Right.
And right now, these companies are making monies off of addicting people to their technology and not bringing value. Um, and so, anyways,
Well
that's
said.
my
Well
soapbox.
said, Hunter. This deserves an applause. Well said.
I appreciate it.
It's refreshing to hear this perspective from your generation. So thank you for saying that. I left Twitter in 2023 because of the bullying and all kinds of things, not just in the general arena, but also in the academic arena. And so I had to leave because it was just not helping at all.
Yeah, and there's other things too. And to be clear, I don't want to put this all on like the intentionally malicious actions of people at these companies, right? Because a lot of times it's not. It's just human nature that causes these externalities or what have you. Like for example, if you tell an AI recommend the content to Dr. Sharif that she is most likely to continue to engage with, it turns out humans are 7 times more likely to engage with negative content than positive content. So it's not like there's a software engineer over at Twitter saying, make the mean bullying get more weight. It's just, it turns out that like that's what we're sensitive to. And so, going back all the way back to our original conversation of like ethics and I think it is like massively important to be thinking about as we're building these systems. What are the value functions that we're basing these systems on, and are they aligned with the benefit of all of the stakeholders?
Yes, and in order to actually, I don't just say this, right? I actually have two modules in my class that I work with the ethics center from the university. I'm not an expert at everything. That's another thing is you gotta surround yourself with experts. So I actually have experts in ethics come in and co-teach the ethics module for me. And so I feel like I'm trying to do whatever I can to get students exposed to things that once they graduate, they are ready to take on the roles that they need to do in society. Unfortunately, what I see sometimes, actually, no, a lot of the time, is students are so focused on the grade
Mm,
that they don't really care about the learning as much. And so I don't know how to get around that. That's again the system, right? Let's say if you're on a Regent scholarship, you want to keep that 4.0 and you're just focused on that rather than
mm.
if you simply just focused on the learning, the grade comes eventually.
Yeah, and that's a great segue, and we've been uh, we've got a little time left. I wanted to talk to you about, because education is another thing that like is important to me, and I think a lot about, because both of my parents are public school, you know primary, secondary teachers in Iowa, and have been my entire life, and whatnot. And you bring up a really good point, just in that case of like, that's the value function, right, of education. Is right now it's grades, right, or in certain situations or for certain students it's grades. um but just to, I guess, for the purposes of scoping the conversation, let's say limiting education to software engineering, right, and adjacent fields. um how do you see, this is the Dev Different podcast, and Dev Different is the mentality all about first principles, valuing simplicity over familiarity. How do you think that if you were to get a clean slate, right, there's no existing infrastructure to educating students about software engineering, requirements engineering, human computer interaction, all of that jazz, how would you do that? And then the follow up is, how do we transition from where we currently are to something that looks more like an ideal educating scenario?
So I think what we need to think about always is the fundamentals, right? The fundamentals. Are we able to teach our students? So if I had a clean slate, I would basically say, I would like to teach my students the fundamentals, how to think critically, how to analyze a scenario without anything, no phones, nothing. Just I'm giving you a scenario in a group, analyze it.
Mm,
Tell me your pros and cons, right? Without any devices. You'll be surprised how many times when I pose a question to the students, the first thing their urge is, their knee jerk reaction is to type it on and say, well, Google says this. And they're so dependent on that. So if I had a clean slate, I would get back to the fundamentals of critical thinking, analyzing, basically analyzing scenarios in the way that we are actually built as humans to do best. Um, Another thing is, I think, focus less on the tools because tools come and go,
mhm,
right? The foundations remain the same. So no matter what it might be cloud computing, which is just a fancy word for what we did before on the mainframes. So it things come and go. AI again, the same thing with AI. It was a hot topic in the 90s and then it disappeared and then now again it's back. So it's fundamentally focus on those things. And then if I had to, since AI is here to stay, at least I believe, and trying to make use of it in a way that does not go against our ethical considerations as software engineers for to benefit society.
mhm.
In the College of Engineering, we have this concept. You are familiar with this, I'm sure, is the complete engineer idea. And I think one of the goals there is to never forget how it impacts society, right? No matter which engineering discipline you're in, we need to always have that front and center. And so if I had to tell students one thing is to think about when they're freshmen, actually think about how you see yourself in 4 years. You might not know what you want to do. You can
Mhm.
still you could change this every year, right? It's not written in stone. Think about yourself, Hunter, when you were a freshman. Did you think that you would be here today doing the things you're doing today? Right? So it's an evolving process. And so oftentimes I think students just feel like it's like a one and done, where it isn't. It's basically an evolving process. So
Yeah, that's great, and that too. I was talking with my wife about this actually. By nature, so everybody wants to be innovative. Everybody wants to do innovation, right? But one of the things that like is not at all uh, in the public ethos or whatever about innovation is like, guess what it requires? It requires a lot of failures and a lot of changes of direction. And I think you have to give yourself permission for that to happen in order to even be able to, be at the table playing the game. Right. Because if you're not giving yourself permission to fail or permission to change direction towards your success that you're striving for, like yeah, you're not even there.
yeah, and
Um,
I want to add one more thing to that, because I see this happen with students, especially, and these are young kids, right? They're 20-year-olds, right? They're still their frontal lobe has still not developed. What does it take? 24, so they're still learning about life. And so I tell them, don't attach what your accomplishments with what you're worth, right? They are two separate things. You're worth it no matter what, right? You can have all of these accomplishments and they're mutually exclusive, right? But I feel oftentimes students connect the two, and which is actually not a good thing. So hopefully they learn that
yeah,
as they go on.
yeah, and just circling back if I can to creating the education scenario that's conducive to students learning. You talk about going back to fundamentals and reasoning and critical thinking and things like that. And one of the things that I find, because I'm just a I have busy hands, right? I'm not able to just like sit down and chill for the most part. And whether I'm working or not working, I'm always doing something. And I found just by kind of like observing my own activities, I have a small workshop in my garage. I just got a 3D printer and I mess around with leather and wood and whatever. But I found that like I tend to gravitate towards a project or something that I can try that I know nothing about, which is like really backwards, right? But it's because I can learn, right? So this summer I have like a 19-foot scamp camper. It's fiberglass, very cool. It's all curved. It's kind of like an Airstream, but it's made out of fiberglass. And I repainted it all this summer, which involves like epoxy gel coat, mixing catalyzers and then shooting it with a paint gun and bunny suit and the whole 9 yards. And it's like, why do I do that? Well, like, why do I take on these projects that I didn't know anything about shooting epoxy gel coat before that, and how I was going to have to sand it all 5 times,
Yeah.
to get it shiny. But my point is that like what I found is I tend to gravitate towards things that allow me to learn, and in doing so, there have been so many times that I've come across something uh, where I was like, man, if I just would have known in school, like trigonometry, for example, right? When I'm making wood plans, just the ability to understand triangles, like intuitively, and be able to do that math, off the top of my head. Like, I wish that I had had that sort of context for the motivation to learn at the time that I learned. And I think, and that's sort of my point in terms of like, if I could change one thing fundamentally about the way that we educate, I think it would be, I don't know how, and maybe AI is a path to this, but how can we create that motivation for learning for each and every individual student in the moment of learning? Because ultimately that's where you get long-term retention beyond just the final test to get the grade, as we talked about. Because like ultimately that's just a proxy. We want people to retain. Um, and I don't know.
One thing I think that helps, and again, I try out. I've taught this class 4 times, and every time it's a different iteration because I try out different things, right, with the goal of helping people retain. Right, that's really my goal. Is my goal to have just great evaluations? If that was my goal, then I would not try out different things. Like I tried out mastery grading last time. The students hated it, but half the class actually liked it. And then I took the good things, and then I'm going to redo it with taking the best parts of it, right? So, but you have to try different things. And one thing I think what would help, what you said, is actually the concept of letting them fail, right? Having iterations. So let's say you give them an assignment. That's kind of what I did with mastery grading. I gave them an assignment and I said, you can submit this assignment twice. So the first time you submit it, let's say you don't do it well in 4 out of 5 parts. So we give you feedback and then you can resubmit it by doing hitting those marks the next time you submit it. And I think that's how they see, oh, I failed here. Let me
Hmm.
make it better. And that's how you learn by failing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a little bit profound, to be honest with you, because, thinking about my own educational career, whatever, like failure was never, that was never a part of anything that I wanted to be a part of,
Yeah.
And if you don't, again, back to my original statement, if you want to create true innovation, you have to have permission and space to fail and change directions.
Yes, truer words have never been said. I
Hmm.
think that's the crux of everything, crux of learning. And I feel like we need to just be comfortable with that.
Hmm. Well, I'm gonna have to think on that one. We have Thanksgiving coming up, and I'm going to visit my parents, and we always get to talking. I'm sure at some point about education and whatnot. So I'm gonna think on that one. How do you create situation in which your students have the space to fail and learn from their failures?
Yeah, that's I'm trying out new things myself. The next time I teach this course, I'm going to also actually bring the human psychology. I'm going to introduce a class on how humans actually think and fail
Yeah.
immediately. And then that'll give them that sort of the permission,
Hmm.
to try out different things and fail and then redo things. So we'll see how that works. I'll let you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me know. I'd love to attend that lecture because all that
You're
stuff
welcome.
is, yeah. Send me the date. Send me an invite. I'll be there. Um, well, awesome. I think we're kind of getting to the end of time here, but it was great to talk to you, and I feel like we'll have to just schedule another podcast, a couple months out or something, because I feel like we could keep going. So, um, yeah, I
Great.
appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you, Hunter. It was a pleasure. Lots of things to talk about.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you would like to have the listeners draw their attention to? Any projects or initiatives that you're particularly excited about? Websites, anything like that?
Not in particular. If they're students, just trust your instincts. Sometimes your instinct is more important than anything else, especially with all the misinformation around us. Trust your instincts, and it'll tell you most of the time what's right.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll be anxiously awaiting the next time that we can make it happen.
My pleasure, Hunter. Thanks.